Thank you very much. I've been promoted, now I'm sitting in the bigger chair. It's a real pleasure to follow on from what we've just discussed so far and to have four very distinguished scholars here, from scholars and practitioners. Dr. Sarah Curry from the Asian Development Bank in the middle is both a scholar and a practitioner. Dr. Jennifer Chan, thank you for joining us as well, from University Malaysia Sabah. Tan Sri Dr. Saleh Muhammad Noor from UCSI, thank you for joining us. And Mr. John Bruno at the far end, the man that everyone should speak to about ecotourism from the International Ecotourism Society. Welcome, John. So the theme for today's for today's expert dialogue session is partnership for common good, the very things that previous speakers have spoken about, and this question of who is responsible for what, right? And it's a really important question, and here I'm started talking about this being storytelling, and I just want to tell a very brief story. As an Australian, we used to have a Prime Minister. He's no longer the Prime Minister. And his response to difficult things was, it's not my job, right? And this question is really important in this particular section, because if we can talk about responsible tourism until we are blue in the face, but until we know who is responsible for what, we don't progress any further. So the panel have been tasked with some very challenging questions. The main underlying question is who is responsible for what? And I realize that is a very broad query. So we will have perspectives from the International Ecotourism Society, the Asian Development Bank, and from two distinguished scholars on the stage as well. So aligned to that question will be things like, what are the critical success factors that make up for effective partnerships? And this is an important question. How can universities and scholars optimize their partnerships beyond the academy with people like Sarah and John? How can the power disparities in the pursuit of partnerships be resolved? And how can partnerships bridge theory and practice? So we have a very challenging agenda in front of us for the next hour. So the challenge is yours if you choose to accept it. And you have no choice, you will accept it. Okay. Perhaps, why don't we start with you, John, because you're furthest away as a member of as the Executive Director of the International Ecotourism Society. Who's responsible for what?
First, I think we have to understand the priorities of the various parties. And I want to start with the fact that all of the distinguished speakers have alluded to the fact that partnership is important. And that isn't just a word. It is, without partnerships, there will be no success. And those of us in the field, those of us in academia, those of us in industry, those of us in NGOs, we all see this on a daily basis. Individual action is wonderful, but it won't be successful. So the things that we're doing here today, and we talked about how to draw them out of theory and into practice. We must draw them out of theory and into practice. So in that way, to start off, I'm not going to let anyone off the hook. It's all of our responsibility. There's no one in here and no one up here that's not responsible for what we're trying to do. But to bring it down further, we need to look at what the individual priorities are. And I think it's been alluded to several times now. It's a circle, isn't it? There's the consumers, there's the operators, there's the governments, there's the services, there's the destinations, there's the ecosystems, all of them interdependent. But let's pick a place to start. Let's start with the consumer. And Liz pointed earlier to the fact that, our research, American Express's research, Booking.com's research all says, and I'm sure you're familiar, having worked at both American Express and at PATA, you've been with two of these organizations that put out this data. The demand for sustainable tourism has grown enormously. So we're dealing with a $1 trillion unmet demand. The further statistic that I think needs to be added to that is 70%, 75%, 90%, let's call it a very large percent of tourists want to travel sustainably, but only 10% know how. Let's talk about that second statistic. That means that half the world, 2 billion travelers, 1 billion of them want to do something, but do not know how. There's a problem and an opportunity there. The problem is that without a path forward, these tourists will learn bad habits from the past. The opportunity is if we, that's all of us here, educate the tourists, the travelers, we can give them a solution to their problem. We can give benefit to our communities, to our destinations, and to our ecosystems. But above all, we can do what it was we meant to do when we became part of the tourism industry. We give people life. We give them memories. We give them time away from the things that they do on a daily basis and where they can stand in amazement, right? So if we want to give them those things, we have to educate them. That's just one point. And I don't want to take too long, but I think what that gives us is an entree into my answer to the question. The short answer is everyone is responsible.
Thank you, John, for that those introductory remarks. Jennifer, would you like to? Dr. Jennifer Chan, Professor and Principal Fellow of Tourism Management at the University Malaysia Sabah.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Coming from my academic background, I think I would like to share my humble perspective on this partnership between academia and the industry. First of all, the critical success factor, based on my past experience, that I have worked and partnered with International Change Hotel, Shangri-La Tanjung Aru, way back 1990s, when I was in charge as a coordinator program for hotel management. And my background is actually coming from the hotels and tour operator. So I'm actually not pure academic. So when I joined university, I began to question, how can a university produce competence, industry relevance graduates? So I began to read as a lecturer to understand what is going on in the industry, the market trend, establish a very good networking with the Director of Human Resource, and we meet every month to talk about the issue of the industry. And later, a very concerned question came out that university students, the graduates, are not meeting the industry's needs. So my replies to most of the industry colleagues was, university cannot produce a magical graduates to meet your needs. We are pure academics. We need to partner with you guys in order to share your technical skills to our students. So we decided to sign an MOU with Shangri-La International Change Hotel, where our students are able to access their in-house training without a cost. So with that kind of negotiation and mutual understanding, the importance of developing quality education, which fall under Sustainable Development Goal number 4. That is very important towards today's, in terms of building up sustainable, responsible community. Yeah. Secondly is that we need to understand and to create a sustainable ecosystem in a structured manner to have a mutual understanding, or so-called Memorandum of Understanding, or LOI or MOA, Now, I understand many universities have done that, but to what extent the outcome of that MOU, MOA has been achieved? Are we successfully forming relevant, strong, trust, and communicated partners? That's very important because university is keen to contribute to theory, but industry is constrained of its profitability. So when you invite industry coming to your guest speaker or whatsoever, when tourism pick up, they are too busy, right? And secondly, it is equally important to understand the mutual goal and benefit to bridge the gaps, the knowledge gap, and to ensure that we all, university or academia and the industry, are accountable, responsible to produce ready-made, accepted technical competence graduates. Yeah? So I think we also need to trash out what are the benefits. When I talk to the industry people, you know, they see us as academic, as a pure researcher. Our research often are not being utilized, or to what extent our research have identified the industry's gap. Yeah? How do our research answer or solve the industry problem? It took me 20 years in the academic to build the trust with the industry player. Today, the president of MATA, Dato Tan, is my good friend. A lot of tourism associations like Kina Batangan, there's Mr. Alex, is a good friend of mine because we can communicate the same message that will enhance the sustainable growth of the tourism industry. So academics need to see how to communicate with the industry people to share your research that is relevant. However, industry player, tourism operator need to actively engage so that the partnership can form in such a way to provide an academic, industry relevant academic program. That is very important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. The issue of relevance is something that's important to all of us, right? So I'll hand over to Dr. Sarah Curry from the Asian Development Bank. She's the Pacific Private Sector Development Initiative Lead, and the Asian Development Bank is one of the lead development agencies in the Asia-Pacific region. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Joseph, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. In terms of that question, I've been reflecting on it for some days now, and I very much agree with John's sentiments that we all have a role to play in terms of building partnerships and ensuring sustainability. And I think there's strengths and weaknesses in all the different agencies that play a role. Jennifer talked about the role academia needs to play. And I've been reflecting from a donor perspective as to the role that donors can play to best support the agenda. And I think Joseph really hit on a key point when he said we need to limit the top-down approach. And I think that's an important message for donors, and as much as we try, it can sometimes be challenging. We need to give agency and voice to communities, as Joseph said, and I think that's the key point as to how donors can best engage and support sustainability in tourism. And I think there's a few parts to that. I think, firstly, that responsiveness to the needs of local communities, talking to governments, talking to industry stakeholders, talking to academia, engaging with these partners. Jennifer just said it took her 20 years to build trust. And I think if donors are to work in a country, we need to spend considerable time in that country, understanding the needs of the stakeholders in that country. How can we possibly support sustainable tourism if we don't understand the local context? And that takes time, 20 years. Sometimes consultation, it can be a tick in the box, or we've spoken to a few people. That's not enough. It needs to be years, decades of work, understanding the issues and responding to them. Trusting the local expertise, adapting to the context, not expecting the context to adapt to the donor's agenda. And I think from that, once that context is understood, I think donors are then in a position with the funding that's available and the programs to support sustainability and to start to kind of mould the development of tourism into a more sustainable model. And I think a few examples from my own program at ADB, we run a technical assistance program for tourism. We respond as best we can to countries' needs, and recently that's involved supporting a reopening framework for tourism, helping countries to safely reopen. But it's also been about, whilst providing that work, gently asking questions such as, what are the longer term goals? How can we plan better for the future? How can we look at sustainability? How can we build better data systems to measure sustainability? And I think it starts with localization and then bringing that expertise once we understand what our stakeholders best want. And I think that's the key message, building those partnerships and ensuring that trust.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll hand over to you, Tan Sri Dr. Salam Muhammad Noor.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat pagi yang berhormat. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at you makes me feel like a mosquito landing in a nudist camp. Where do I start? You all have heard the questions being answered, but I always believe in pictures tells 1,000 words, and sure, I'm going to take you through a very quick presentation of mine, and I hope the chairman won't hit me on the head for running over time. Okay, next slide, please. And, tourism is a global industry, everybody knows it. Next, please. The question is, why do foreigners come to Malaysia? Is it for food? Hospitality? I've heard this morning, gastronomy, tourism. Now I understand why Malaysia is an obese society. People eat all the time, from morning to night. Next, please. I had a recent visit to Pulau Redang, and it was wonderful because I swam with the green turtles, and that was real life, nature tourism. Next, please. Definition, you all do tourism to enjoy nature. You can define it any way you like. Next, please. In this country, we have what I call the hardware of tourism. We have Mulu caves, Nia caves, the pinnacles, forests, lakes, marine parks, mountains, Mount Kinabalu, the highest mountain in South Asia. All these are the hardware. But the issue is, the missing is what I call the software of tourism. Next, please. The software of ecotourism is an example. I've seen tour guides going to a frame, which is the first such institute, says, this is a tree. Of course it's a tree. Everybody knows what a tree is. But it doesn't tell what species it is, what the flower looks like, what the fruit looks like, which insects pollinate it. That is knowledge base. And that is ecotourism. The software of ecotourism is very, very important, which is often missing. Yeah? You go to America, you see the 5 presidents or 4 presidents of the United States, and they tell you this is X, Y, Z, and then they tell you history of each one of them. That is important. The knowledge, information should be shared, and use QR codes. If you go to KLCC Park in Kuala Lumpur, you just put your QR to the tree on the QR code, and it tells you the history of the tree, the species of the tree, when was it planted, who planted it. That is knowledge. And that is what tourism should be all about, the knowledge base of tourism. Next, please. Unique and special, I don't have to tell you, our country is rich, and Sarawak is very, very rich in nature. How many of you, may I ask, have seen Rafflesia in the wild? Put up your hands. A minority. Exactly what I say. You all know what a rafflesia is, but you have not seen it. So you can talk about it, but you have never seen the largest flower in the world. See what I mean? You all see some flowers on TV, I mean not flowers, you all see on TV, on pictures, but you have never seen it, never touched it, never smelt it. That is what to me is ecotourism. Insects, butterflies. Play with them, enjoy them, be part of them. Next, please. Next, please. Life, love nature, love life. Move the video, please. Move the video. Sayang, tolonglah. My wife is there. All these videos are done by her. I was born BC, before computers, and not before Christ. And all the videos are done by my wife. See? They don't know how to move the video. Come on. Tolong. You're not moving. Okay, next slide lah. Okay. Tak kenal, tak cinta. Means if you don't know, you don't love. See? Let's see the video of the love dance of the, what bird? Sang? What bird? See what I need my wife for? What bird? Yeah. What bird, Sam? The bird of paradise. How the dance of the bird of paradise. That is nature, my dear friends. Yeah. How many of you seen this? You have. Alhamdulillah. It's not here. It's not in Sarawak. That is not. Yeah, somewhere in South America. See, wonderful. How many of you dance with your wife like that when you romance? None. Yeah. That's a problem. Yeah? So this is nature in its beauty. Next, please. Tak kenal means tak cinta. Means we don't know, you don't love. Next, please. So we need trained guides. We need schools for tour guides. Yang Muhammad, Sarawak should have a school for trained guides. My dear friend Movinda will do it here in UCSI. Yeah. Next, please. Let's see the waterfall. Ayo. Come on. See, this is a quotation by me. Loss of biodiversity is akin to burning your books before you have, burning your library before you have read them, or burning your books. Meaning, you have to conserve all this wealth. And that's what we have to do. Next, please. The value from Mr. Google says the worldwide value for ecotourism is 881 billion in 2019, which goes up to 338 billion in 2027. That's huge. More than the GDP of Sarawak. Next, please. So in conclusion, it's a huge potential, but we need laws to protect these unique sites. Without laws, this beautiful nature will disappear, and you and I will not have the opportunity to visit them. And more important, I would like to end by quoting Mahatma Gandhi. He says, the world has enough for everybody's needs, but not for everybody's greed. And you know what I mean under the present context of Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for that. I haven't been able to let go of the mental image of the mosquito at the nudist colony that you mentioned. I would hate to be the mosquito. I will. I'll make sure I cite you. Okay. So there was a lot in that. The hardware and the software, I think good metaphors for what's needed in tourism development. And I guess we have time for questions. If anybody has any questions, Any questions for our four eminent speakers, please? Or any further comments from our panel while...
May I start with a question?
Okay.
I asked just now, how many have you been seen reference? How many have you been to Mount Kinabalu? Raise your hand up. Young Muhammad, I saw only 4 hands, Young Muhammad. That Mount Kinabalu is a fantastic climb. I climbed it in 1969 before many of you were born. Yeah. And you all are here, you all should go to Mount Kinabalu. It's not very far. It's in just next state. How many of you have been to Mulu caves? See, Young Muhammad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you have been to Nia caves? A bit more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but 10. Young Muhammad, you have such wonderful things here. Therefore, my question is, how can we encourage the younger generation to really appreciate nature? How can we encourage them to go out and dirty their feet, get beaten by leeches? Yeah? Don't protect them. You don't see them on TV only. Let them go out. How do you do that? How can we do that? Maybe.
Tan Sri, I think true education is very important. In Malaysia context, we have this kind of paradigm that Western foreign country is much better than our neighbors, right? So we have to shift, bring the mentality towards like what we recently said, Cinta, love our country first, through tourism, to educate them the appreciation, the importance of nature, the sustainability of our nature resources that will continue to contribute to sustainable growth and development for their generations. So with that kind of constant awareness, training, education, and with the support from the industry, the tourism industry, the destination management is very important. One of the examples I like to share is Sabah Tourism Board. Because of the performance from the academic and is able to build how relevant the research, our work is relevant to the industry. Today, I'm tasked to train quite a number of district tourism, rural tourism players. And for me to do that, I told the CEO of Sabah Tourism Board, I cannot just sit here and design the module. I have to talk to the player, and I bring my young student, the researcher, together with me. So they will get a greater exposure to understand the context. So once I understand the needs of the local community from different districts, each community have different cultural backgrounds, their needs are very different. For example, geotourism in Kota Marudu. When I talk to the Rural Tourism Association, I say you cannot develop your tourism product across the district with the same product. So Kota Marudu has been gazetted, by the way, Mount Kinabalu, Tan Sri, has been going to be gazetted as an international UNESCO geopark. So that is a very important piece of natural heritage that state government, not only state government, everybody need to protect and preserve. So I began to to share the knowledge with the local community at Kota Marudu. How do you develop your geotourism? So that you don't compete with Ranau, Kota Balut. So that kind of mentality if you are able to instill the importance of the natural resources to their livelihood, then they will appreciate. Yeah, thank you. I think.
So cooperation versus competition, I think, is what you're saying, right? So to Sarah and John, from the International Ecotourism Society and the ADB perspective, what's one critical success factor for partnerships in the work that you both do?
What I see, and I'll refer to, and you can look this up if you want, if you have your devices, the X-Prize is an organization that we partner with. And we're part of an organization that they built around conservation of coral. And so in the Bahamas, the Prime Minister is a lady named Mia Motley. And so what we have done there is to create the all government and all operator, academic, and community team to preserve coral, which is, as everyone knows, gravely endangered. By thinking about how it can be sustainably developed, how it can generate positive revenue, but at the same time, how this can serve the community and conserve the precious coral, which is a birthright and a cultural right for the people. So what was successful there was harnessing everyone's ability to contribute, and again, as Joseph mentioned earlier, removing the dynamics of below and above, and that some people's priorities and some people's processes are more important than other people's priorities and other actors' processes. So the first ideal was the coral and its conservation. It can't speak for itself. So valuing it highly, valuing the needs of the community, and having clear-cut goals, near-term clear-cut goals. So everyone is responsible for specific tasks, everyone is responsible for meeting specific goals, and everyone has an idea of what's necessary to succeed. And that's been very successful.
That's actually reminded me of a really interesting example of similar work we're doing in the Pacific at the moment, and very much looking to link tourism and sustainability directly through partnerships. It's actually to do with coral as well. We've started developing coral reef insurance products through ADB in Fiji and Solomon Islands. And essentially how it works is it's an insurance product that private sector operators along coral reefs in select locations in these countries can purchase, such that when there's a natural disaster, such as a tsunami or a cyclone, and those reefs are damaged, the communities are given a payout to actually help rebuild the coral reefs. So it's a really interesting partnership and a project, because essentially it's looking at how communities rely on coral reefs for tourism. But the product of that is actually rebuilding coral reefs, which is essential for sustainability, essential to stop the effects of climate change in the Pacific. And so it's showing how tourism can fund sustainability, and it can also support industry operators who depend on these resources. And it's also an important partnership between governments in the region and also donor partners such as ADB in bringing together these products. And it's been about 3 years in the making. It hasn't happened quickly, but the project is going to be launching within the next year or so. And we hope that what's happening in Fiji and Solomon Islands will be an example for what's possible for coral reefs in other parts of Asia and the Pacific.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a hand raised at the front here. Thank you. We get a microphone there for the gentleman. Oh, you have a microphone. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Andreas Zins from Curtin University, Miri. I would like to come back to our starting point of this morning, starting keywords partnerships. And thank you, John, mentioning that there is a huge latent demand that you argue currently is not addressed, is not satisfactorily, say, addressed. by, say, the industry, tourism, and so on. I want to critically point our attention to something that hasn't been mentioned so far, looking for partnerships. I believe, I come from academia, and I've attended many conferences like these ones, that we from academia, from schools, from education, we have solutions, we have papers, and we can read that, what is responsible tourism. We share our knowledge and try to go mostly in self-defense mode, that we practice that already. So I'm asking why there is still so much latent demand that don't know how to consume responsibly. So what is missing here? And it's a complex problem, I know, but what I miss here and in so many other conferences is the media, the role of the media. I find that our schools, our universities, the educational system, yeah, they do their job, we try hard, but our effectiveness is limited. You know, to really educate the masses, the millions of consumers, of travelers adequately. So it's a bit of a challenge back to the panel. Where is the media? What is their responsibility? How can we partner? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. And what you're talking about, if you'll permit me for a moment, is to, I want to bring some perspective to academia. And that is that the challenge of, sometimes the challenge of a message is its communication, not its crafting. So you can have all sorts of, Mozart wrote all sorts of music, but it wasn't heard because there was the communication, right? Now we know it's genius, right, don't we? But that's about a few hundred years too late for poor Mozart. So we have to say, when all these messages are being created, how can we get those messages out to the world? And again, I have to go back to the word that we discussed. The solution to the lack of partnership is more partnership. In other words, academia has to, we have a huge channel, so partner with me. I'm not saying specifically, but I am. You can talk to me afterwards. Every one of us, every one of the people seated here has channels. So how are you assembling a channel for your message? How are academics reaching the world? We're here, we're ready to work with you. So what I think, look, we saw I said consumers, we have education, we talked about funders, we talked about engagement, right, of young people. The circle of all of this is, yes, it needs to be communicated. And in order to do that, we have to overcome our perception that partnership is something that sits out there and we'll walk toward it and maybe get to it. We have to aggressively pursue it, all of us, in order to create those possibilities. And when we do, we'll find out that I would love to publish your articles. I mean that. And plenty of us would. All of us would. Right? So those of us that have the channels need the information. You have the information and you need the channel. There's a partnership that needs to happen there. So I think the solution for the media and everything else, remember they're like private sector, they come in second. When everything is safe, then the media comes in, right? So what we want to do is we want to partner during those times and we want to make these things happen. And it isn't just for communications, there's plenty of other deliverables that we can achieve when we work together.
Thank you, Dr. Zinn, for your comment about the inclusion of the media. I think that's a very important point. Perhaps the next conference will draw on that. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience or comments? Please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Victor Luna from the Ministry of Tourism here. This question goes to Tan Sri Dr. Saleh. I knew him when he was the former director of FRIM. Yeah. You mentioned about this morning is about there is a need to train tour guide, need for a school for tour guide. Basically, we all know that the role of the tour guide, there are multiple roles. They are the ambassadors, they are the communicators, they are mediators, and so forth. Basically, I tend to agree with your suggestions. The question is that how will we do this? How could we partners? How do we develop the curriculum? But in Sarawak, just for the information that we have actually trained, because we have 47 national parks in Sarawak. We have trained, Sarawak Forest Corporation has trained actually about 300 tour guide. So we call it, it's a park guide, you know, only specifically for the national parks. But basically, what we train them actually is, we utilize the traditional ecological knowledge, because you all know that, you mentioned that we need a law, but sometimes, you know, tourists going to the national parks, many of them doesn't care about the laws. So what we did is, we teach them using thematic interpretation, using a theme, using the traditional knowledge of the community to control their behaviors. For example, you don't have to pee somewhere. So the forefathers said, don't pee somewhere because there is something there, you know. So this kind of what we call curriculum need to be revamped to include the community aspect of traditional knowledge into the curriculum of tour guide, because most of the time we teach them about the facts and figures. This is a cave, this is the age of the cave, and so forth. So it's not enough. So there is a really need to ensure, because many of our tour guide, I think they already utilize that kind of thematic interpretation, which is very effective to gain their behaviors, to control their behaviors, and also to send the messages when they go back home. Thank you.
Before we wind up, perhaps Tan Sri, you can have a response to.
Thank you for the question, sir. I am deaf in 1 ear, so I can't hear exactly what you asked. But the chairman will advise me. Now I've forgotten what you asked, sir.
Oh, okay. Perhaps I've got a message to conclude. So maybe at lunchtime you can continue the conversation.
Maybe just one word.
What? One word?
Not exactly one, 5 words.
Okay, please.
I must congratulate Sarawak, Muhammad. Sincerely, I think Sarawak has done a lot on tourism. The reason why I say that I've met many friends who have been to Sarawak and have enjoyed it. And my own grandson came here and he disappeared for 2 weeks. I said, where are you, Amir? No answer, nothing. He was roaming Sarawak all on his own. And he lives in the US. And so he really enjoyed Sarawak. And when he went back to US, he WhatsApped me and says, Atok means grandfather. I'm a grandfather. I'll be a great-grandfather soon. You know what's the worst thing about being a great-grandfather? You'll be sleeping with a great-grandmother. Now, he said, it was so wonderful, he said. He met natives, he met animals in the forest. So you have all the elements of it. But to my mind, you must develop that into a formal teaching mechanism. Teach your guides to speak more than just English and Bahasa Malaysia. Teach them Spanish, teach them German, teach them all the languages. And Spanish is very important, so that we attract people from Latin America and create that software of ecotourism that I talked about. Thank you. Sorry, it's more than 5 words.
So we should conclude before we get into any further trouble. On behalf of everyone, Mr. John Bruno, thank you. Dr. Jennifer Chan, thank you. Dr. Sarah Curry, thank you. And Tan Sri Dr. Muhammad Noor, thank you very much for the wise remarks. Yes.
Muhammad Noor is my father's name.
Oh, okay. Salim Ahmed, no, I apologize. Okay, once again, I think, thank you all for your attendance. I think it's lunchtime. Please have lunch and come back. I think that's what Hiram wants me to tell everyone. And thank you all for listening, and thank you to the panel once again.